In this video, I'm going to show you 7 must-know tips for installing baseboard as a beginner, and I'm going to show you what not to do if you want professional-looking results as a DIYer. And if you're new to this channel, my name's Josh. You know, it's all about DIY to save a ton of money. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell so you get a notification every time I release a new video, and hammer that like button for me. It's all I ask in return for making this video. So we got some great tips to go over, so let's get started. Tip number 1, be sure to pre-paint your base before installing it onto the wall. After you install it onto the wall, you just have to touch up the nail holes and caulk and then do touch-up paint afterwards. And don't be fooled, most trim comes primed. It looks painted, but it is not. It's just primed to where it needs to be painted before you have a completed project. So make sure you take that in consideration when ordering your baseboard. Tip number 2. Be sure to place the right blade on your miter saw before beginning your baseboard project. I have a 100 teeth blade on. This is what's considered a fine tooth blade. This is going to give you really nice clean cuts to where it will not have near the splintering compared to, let's say, a framing blade. So there's going to be way less caulking and touch up if you use the correct blade. Also, to reduce splintering the baseboard when you're cutting, be sure to cut slow. That's going to give the teeth time to cut through the wood instead of forcing it through. So that's going to give you a much cleaner cut. When cutting baseboard, it's important to have extendable arms on your miter saw stand because the length of the baseboard is typically 12 to 16 feet. So you need something to support those long lengths. If you don't have a miter saw stand like this, all you'd have to do is set up saw horses and then make sure you're the right elevation to the base of the saw. It'll do the same thing, but this just makes it way easier. Tip number 3, how to join together 2 pieces of base whenever you have a wall longer than the base you have. This is a wall that is longer than 12 foot, and I got a 12-foot piece of base laying on the floor behind me. You can see it is short. So how do you exactly join those 2 together to continue the run of base? It's very easy. I'm about to show you, but just so you know, they do make 16-foot base. So if you do have a wall that is shorter than 16 feet, I would recommend just getting 16-foot long base to make that instead of joining together 2 pieces whenever you can. So how do we do this? First, we need to locate the studs on the wall. The easiest way is just to use a stud finder to locate the stud and then go from there. But I want to show you a simple DIY way of doing this without buying a stud finder. If you locate a receptacle on the wall, you're going to have a stud on one side or the other, and that screw is in line with the studs. And because we built this house, we knew we'd have to locate the studs to install the base. So it's a little tip there as well. If you're installing your drywall, put a screw here at the bottom so you know where your studs are. We're going to use the tap test to make sure the stud's there. And you can hear it's definitely more solid sounding there. I'm then going to use a nail to make sure there's a stud there, and we're going to drive the nail at the same height as the base or lower, so that way we don't have a hole clear up here somewhere. Obviously, it's going to get covered up by the base, so we're going to check for the stud. And there's definitely a stud there. So we're going to use that to measure off of 16 on center to locate the rest of the studs as we install the base. So we know our next stud is going to be back here, and then the stud from here will be over here. But we don't want to mark that on the floor or anything at this time. We just need to know where the first one is. I'm just going to mark on the floor with a little light pencil mark so we know to measure from there to get the layout as we nail the base onto the wall. But what does this have to do with joining together 2 pieces of trim? Well, we got to break the cut at a stud so we have a place to nail. I now need to mark the stud closest to the length of this trim in which it needs to be cut. I'm going to flip the base up and place it right up against the wall. And I know I need to mark this at the last stud that we need to cut to make the break. Taking my tape, I'm going to place on that mark we made on the floor where the stud is. And we know that we're 16 on center, so each red mark on a tape is 16 on center, 16, 32, etc. Looks like the next stud that's closest to the end of this trim is right here. I'm just going to mark right here at the center of it to get our length. And we're going to keep that in square on that base because there's a way we're going to do those corners I'm going to show you in the next tip. All right, I'm here at the miter saw. I want to slide the base down until we get to the mark that we made. Because we're coming from the right side, we want to make sure we turn our miter saw towards the right when we make this cut. and I'm going to slide over until we're at a 45-degree angle. And you can see it here, there's a hard stop. Standing the base up against the fence and make sure it's tight to the base of the miter saw, we're going to cut onto that line for our 45 degree. Okay, we're going to place this right back where we originally had it before we cut it. And I'm going to set the base here and not nail it yet until we cut this piece that joins it. You get the measurement to make the joint. I'm going to measure right off the wall because it's going to butt right against that wall. And then we're going to measure right to this point on the base. And we got 18 3/8. So we're going to cut this 18 3/8 to this long point of this piece. With another piece of base, I'm going to be pulling off this side because it's going to be butting to the wall. We're going to measure over 18 3/8 and make a mark on the face. While keeping the miter saw at the same 45-degree angle, I'm going to make that cut, and this time we're going to be on the right side of this mark. And this is the piece we'll be installing next. Okay, I'm going to dry fit this to see what the joint looks like. And you can see that makes a nice joint like that. But I'm going to secure this side to the wall first before I secure that. And we don't want to put a nail here yet. Come back to the next stud, put one on this side. Place the nail towards the bottom, then a nail towards the top. Now we can address the actual joint. We now place this right over that joint, and you can see that gives us a really nice joint. That looks great. That's what we want. And it's almost seamless. That's very nice feel. I'm going to put a nail to join these two right here, right in the face going into the stud. Then lower. Wow, that joint turned out really nice. And now we secure the rest of it at each stud, two, one at the bottom, one towards the top of the base. When nailing the rest of this off, use your tape measure and line a 16 on center mark on to the mark that we made on the floor for our stud. Now give us a place to nail as we go across the base. Here's a tip. Whenever you're nailing your base, make sure that it's flat on the floor because the base definitely is never perfect and you have to manipulate it to adjust to the floor. Whenever your trim is elevated off the floor like this, just take it, put it against the wall, and then push down on it. You can see it close that gap, then place your nails. Much better. Tip number 4, why you should never 45 your inside corners. When you get to an inside corner, you would think you would just put a 45 here and then a 45 here and have a nice looking corner when it's all said and done. But as you can see, even here, it's already illustrating it. Oftentimes your drywall tapers here at the bottom. So because of that, whenever you place a nail, it's going to draw that in on both sides and create a gap like so. And it's fine and dandy if you want to do this and caulk it, that's up to you. But I'm going to show you a better way. It's a little more work, but it's definitely a better corner when it's said and done. I'm going to cut this off straight, just like we butt into the wall on the last tip. And then I'll show you how to cut this to join it to make it look really nice. I'm going to slide this back out of the way. And obviously this is an example. You would clearly have a longer piece going that way and a longer piece going this way. But I just want to show you how this works. So you'd have a piece butt right into the corner. And you would then cut this one at a 45, but obviously it's not joining because we have plenty of wood here in the way. We need to use a coping saw to cope this piece of wood out of the side so the profile will go against this profile to create a nice joint. Using what's called a coping saw, we're going to follow the profile of this cut here, and we're going to angle it slightly away while we're cutting. We don't want to cut to where we're angled like this, because that's going to give us similar problems. We want to make sure it's angled back towards the trim so that it goes and cuts back into it to close it up. First, get a strong, steady base, and then place your hand on the base to hold it solid. Then we're going to start with our coping saw, and again, we want to angle this towards the trim, not away like so. And if you start by pushing the blade away, that's going to be how you ease into the trim. keep it on an angle towards it, and then just follow that profile to make the cut. For this straight cut, you could also use a miter saw here. You would flip your base upside down with the finished face facing towards you, turn the saw a degree away from the profile, and then cut down that profile similar to what you're doing here, except it'd be on the miter saw. Then we would just cope the other side like normal in the next step here. And then we come from the other way to finish off this section of the profile. And you'd almost want to square off this tip like so. And you could also take a little sandpaper to get this edge really flat. And we're going to go ahead and test this against that piece. I wanted to point out this slope away from the face so you know about the angle you want in order to cope this out properly. Now that we have this piece coped, you're going to notice it's going to slide together much better and create a better joint. Now, if this sinks in, it's not near the problem as it was before. And what some people do, if they do decide to use the 45 method here, is they'll put a shim in behind here and shim out the bottom. So that way, whenever you put nails here, it will not sink it in. So if you do decide to use the 45-degree method instead of the coping method, definitely place something in the back so it doesn't kick that bottom in. Tip number 5, addressing uneven floors. There is a little hump right here in the floor, and most of the time you can simply push it down like I showed you before and work it out, but sometimes you just can't. So this is how I address this issue. I'm first going to take my pencil and lay it flat here on the floor. I'm then going to bring it back to where the end of the pencil lines up with the gap. It looks like it's about right here, and we're going to press it right against that base and glide right across the floor. And that's going to scribe a line on the base that's going to need cut out. You can see if we take 1/8 off this hump here, that's going to give us enough to go down onto the floor flat. So I'm going to show you how I like to cut this out. I'm going to take the base up and then set on sawhorses to cut out that line. Using a jigsaw with a scrolling blade on it, I'm going to follow that line and cut that out. And I'm going to take my time and do a good job. We want it as smooth as possible. All right, we cut that little bit off to take out that difference. To clean up this edge, I'm going to use a belt sander and take my time and get that nice and smooth. That way it contours the floor better. All right, it looks nice and clean. We're now going to dry fit that into place. And as you see here, that took a lot of that out. It's sitting much better on the floor. So sometimes you do just got to scribe and cut out sometimes to give you a good finish against the floor. And you can see here that gap shut way better. Now it takes a little bit of pressure for that to go down all the way here. And same back here, a little bit of pressure, and that looks really good. So we're going to push this down and nail it to the floor. Tip number 6, whenever you address your outside corners, cut them at 45.5 degrees so that way they're a little sharper to go together in the face of them, almost guaranteed. And that's because each corner is not a perfect 90-degree angle. So if you have a 45 and a 45, you're going to meet here in the back, and you could have a gap like so, and I'll show you this down here in a second on this corner, but we already trimmed out all the outside corners. We didn't realize that until now, but I'm going to show you just sitting on top of this base what it looks like whenever you cut a 45 degree and your corner's not perfect. And yes, you could cut it exactly 45 degrees and that would be okay with some corners, but your best just cut a little bit sharper and then you're almost destined to have a nice outside corner. This was cut at a 45.5 degree angle. You can see how it closed up real nice and tight. Placing this here, these are cut at a 45, and if we place them into the corner, you can see because they're cut at a 45, they are not closing up as near as well as the bottom side. I'm going to cut this at 45.5 degrees and show you how much better this will close up. We're now going to place this up here after we cut it to 45.5, and it looks like you can see the gap here is much better now that we have that cut, and you can see that's going to be easily caulked, and actually it might be sharp enough or clean enough to where you don't even need much caulk at all, just paint. So that's why you should cut at 45.5 degrees or even more sometimes. If you are enjoying this type of content, you may enjoy my free PDF. I'll put a link to it in the description below. Tip number 7, how to put a return on base. And what a return does, whenever you have an area where it stops, let's say up to this vent, we need to blunt end it without cutting it straight. You could cut it straight and just stop it, but it doesn't look that good. It just doesn't look that professional. I like to put what's called a return. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm first going to get a measurement right from the wall to the edge of this vent. I got 8 1/4 heavy, and I'm going to cut this at a 45 to where the long point of the 45 is flush with the longest measurement. So 8 1/4 heavy, and then we're going to cut it blunt back in this corner. And obviously you know how to finish the inside corner. So I'm first going to cut that and then cut a little piece for a 45 for that. I'm going to measure 8 1/4 heavy, make a mark. And again, that's the long point, so we need to cut our 45 in this direction. So this is our piece. Now I'm going to show you how to cut for the return here. Very simple. I'm going to turn our 45 this way now. I'm now just going to cut this off anywhere here. I'm now going to go to 0. And we want to cut this off just to where we need most of this back. We don't want to overlap any of this white, just majority of this returned area here, which happens to be just a little less than a 1/2 inch. So we need this itty bitty little piece here. You can see the idea here is very straightforward. Now that we have a little 45 cut, it's going to finish up this end. It's going to give us a nice finished return. To finish this, we just got to put some wood glue here. You don't need a ton. It's not very much wood to glue. And that's going to be where we want that to set up, about right in there. And what I like to do to make sure this doesn't come apart while it's setting up, use a little bit of painter's tape, and we're going to tape this corner. All right, I'm going to let that set up before placing that on the wall. Okay, I'm back after another hour or so, and this has set up. So we're going to remove this tape, and looks like we are good to go. As you can see, that gives us a nice return here on this piece of base. So let's go install this. Let's place this where it's to be installed, and that looks really good. All right, we're just going to shoot that onto the wall like we typically would. That gives us a nice return right there against that vent. If you'd like to see how I installed this pre-hung door, check out this video. It'll help you out.